This is my first video on a series of videos about Oregon's DHS CPS child trafficking mafia. I call it a mafia because there's collusion between judges, lawyers, law enforcement, medical, places like Liberty House, caseworkers, Department of Justice, attorneys to lie and justify removing people's children and justify keeping those children from their parents as long as possible, and in many cases adopting those children out. They claim best interest of the child, but far from it. The chief offenders I find are in DHS and in organizations like CASA, who will never say anything positive about a family. And so there's a lot to go over. If you don't like strong language, then you probably don't want to watch this video, because I have strong things to say about the people that are doing this to families. And so I'll do my best to cover the subjects, and I'll have more videos as time goes by. Thank you. In this series of videos, I want to talk about Oregon Department of Human Services, Child Welfare Division, often referred to as CPS, and how they remove children from families and work very hard to not return those children if they so decide. There's a lot to discuss here, and I have listened to the tragic stories of many parents who have had dealings with Oregon DHS CPS, and it's beyond imagination what Oregon's DHS CPS does to families. And there's a lot to discuss here, and I have listened to the tragic stories of many parents who have had dealings with Oregon DHS CPS, and it's beyond imagination what Oregon's DHS CPS does to families. And there are very dramatic things that happen to families, heartbreaking things, and DHS is very busy doing this, and they are often in violation of their own procedures. And it's quite a big story. It's a wide story. It has a lot of elements going on. And in my opinion, I think that the entire thing that drives it, for the most part, is money. And in Oregon, there's close to $1 billion spent on child removals. And this situation was accelerated or made much worse than it was by Hillary Clinton's Adoption and Safe Families Act, which would give states matching funds if they remove children from their families by taking the money from Social Security, Title IV funds, and also provide bonus money if the children were adopted out. So this became a federal government sponsored funding of child trafficking of children away from families. Now there's very little money spent to put those children back in families or help those families that are struggling. And the reason I use the word child trafficking is because the definition of trafficking is the movement of a person for exploitation, be it financial or otherwise, through the means and use of deception or coercion. And as we will discover and discuss, Oregon's child program operates on deception, it operates on false reports, and it operates on lying in court, and it operates by allowing and knowingly consenting to lies by witnesses in court. And it's a big spider web. So I'm trying not to go into too deep into any one area on this introduction. So there's a lot of money involved. Now, I'll just sort of start going through some items here. Number one, I have asked state legislators to find out and identify how much money changes hands for one child in foster care for 1 month. I have not gotten any response from any state legislator or Senator Merkley's office, because it's federal money, correct? So that's involved. So he should be able to answer that question. They should have a grip on that number. Now, it's not just money paid to the foster parents. There's a whole feeding chain involved in this. And I asked then Senator Thatcher if she could give me the number, but of course she couldn't or wouldn't, because in reality, a very large number of the constituency of the citizens are involved in support services to DHS, eating cash for kids. So how big is the picture? Well, I think there's anywhere from 7,500 to 8,500 kids in foster care in Oregon right now I'll say the last year, because it's gone up and down. I don't see new numbers yet, but we're in 2022, April. So to go over some of these details, I want to try to draw a picture of the process that DHS uses. They use a somewhat anonymous system for calling in, quote, child abuse. So that means that people can make false allegations. They can call in things on their neighbors, things on a spouse, on an ex-spouse, on a grandson, grandchild, daughter, son. And they are never really held accountable for what they call in. They just call it in. And so there's low accountability there. It can be used for any motive. So DHS starts this process where they have a system set up that addresses the issue and what they do if there's an investigation or if the child's removed. And then they start adding all these services and third-party contractors. And so the number of employees involved and the number of assets involved becomes enormous. I estimate that a lot of money changes hands for one foster child in foster care beyond what the foster parents get paid. I believe that the child is at the bottom of the ladder. They matter the least to DHS. The parents of the child are the next rung up. They matter the least to DHS. And the foster parent is a necessary to, quote, take care of the child, end quote, while they operate their whole process. And the money up above that is enormous. So let's say you have 2 or 3 kids and you're low income and you have maybe $300-400 a month that you get in EBT. That's like food stamps. So apart from you working or your spouse working, the only money assigned to your family, unless you're on Section 8 housing, is this $300-400 in food stamps, or maybe you get TANF for a few $100s. But that's about it per month. So you take your $300-400 of money from food stamps and you go to Safeway or Walmart or wherever and you spend the money. Then you get your TANF and you go and you buy odds and ends. And then you've got money coming in maybe from a small job or something, minimum wage, whatever it is. And that's the maximum cash flow coming from your family and coming through the government. But if DHS walks in and takes those 3 kids, they suddenly generate a massive cash flow, cash register going ka-ching, 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 nonstop every month for 3 kids. So 1 kid will have a counselor assigned, a doctor assigned, a dentist assigned, a lawyer assigned. There will be drivers to go and pick the kids up for visitation. There will be a caseworker for the 3 children, maybe more than 1. There will be possibly separate attorneys for each child. The children might be in 2 different foster homes or 3 different foster homes. There will be a case supervisor. There will be a case manager and an office manager. And then there will be cars, and there will be buildings, and then there will be third-party contractors providing services, such as Liberty House, Options, CASA, all these other building blocks, all these other groups. There'll be required classes maybe for the parents that they have to pay for, and so forth. And so if you look at the entire budget of child welfare for a year, which is in the hundreds of millions, and you divide it by the number of children in child welfare for a year, you get an idea of the massive amount of money changing hands over 1 child. And so you get these buildings and these cars and the staff, and let's say you have 8,500 kids in child welfare. And what happens if you come along and you suddenly decide that a lot of things aren't being done properly and that children are being kept from their families more than they should be, and you start getting kids home, and you go from 8,500 kids to 3,700 kids maybe. You change the system. You find flaws in it and you change it. And suddenly you have this infrastructure, this child industrial complex, child removal industrial complex, that you got all these private contractors, safety service providers, buildings, cars, state employees. They don't have a job anymore. And so in the name of preventing child abuse, they have to keep rattling all the locations and ways in which they can pull in kids. So they make sure the doctors are looking, the schools are looking. They encourage people to call in. And it doesn't mean that they are protecting children that need protecting. Further, this is costing hundreds of millions of dollars, and very little money is being spent on helping families. So let's say you have a family where there's a lot of financial difficulties and there's not enough food in the house or such, or people have to work too many jobs, or things are just not going well, and it comes to DHS's attention, and they could come in and say, look, we're going to hook you up with a family advocate. We're going to make sure you got enough food in the house. We're going to help you find a babysitter if that's what you need, and we're going to help stabilize your family. But from everything I've seen in talking to dozens and dozens of parents, they don't do that. There's not near the money in it in vilifying the family to justify their budget and what they're doing. And I hear this from a lot of parents. And so we have to look at the way that money drives the removal of these children and keeps them in the system because they make cash. They make a lot of cash. One family might generate in a couple of years millions of dollars in cash flow for DHS. Another thing that I want to reiterate and bring up again is that caseworkers will lie. CASA workers will do everything to discourage kids from going home. Tell them they're going to lose all kinds of benefits if they decide to go home, which isn't the job of CASA. And judges, lawyers, caseworkers, and a lot of other people in the court will either lie or consent to lies. It's a very important point, is that they may know that people have lied, but they will go along with it and use it in their reports to justify not sending the kids home. The other thing that I want to mention is that there's a lot of discrimination against low-income, minority, or biracial families by DHS and the courts in Oregon. And the current CPS Child Welfare Division manager is an African-American woman. Her name's Rebecca Gaston Jones, and she wrote a pamphlet that's online in PDF format that is called Visions for Transformation. Now, the background to that is that there's been all kinds of audits of DHS. DHS has been sued repeatedly. They've paid out millions and millions of damages, settlements in cases where kids were abused in foster care, or they died in foster care, all sorts of things. And so there's obvious problems. But in reality, when they say that low income and minority families are targeted, that's in a lot of ways just a lot of talk, because as I have told Rebecca Gaston Jones in an email, is if there isn't teeth put into it, it won't stop. So if caseworkers are not fired for lying, if they are not threatened with arrest for committing a crime of putting false information knowingly in a report that is adverse to the children going home, then they'll just keep doing it. There's no penalty for it. And I have watched in many cases where one caseworker can terrorize family after family and get away with it. There's no penalty. And you can go on Oregon salaries, some state website, and you can just watch their salaries go up and up. One example of this was Stacy Dashner, and I believe she's still employed, and she's making over $100,000 a year, hidden away somewhere in DHS. So, and there's a lot of cases that I can talk about of where DHS workers do what they do best, which is do whatever they have to do to keep the kids in child welfare. Now, I don't know how they determined if they're arbitrarily going to let one set of kids go home versus another. I've heard of kids that were bounced around between like 17, 18 foster homes. Some kids get placed with families, and you can see there's intent to adopt those kids out immediately. So they pick a family that's looking for kids. I mean, you can even look on Oregon Kids, the website, and it'll say how to pursue adoption through DHS. So they can say they say always that we're short of foster parents. So they can say, hey, we got this little kid, he's 6 months old or something, we're taking him from the parents, and we're going to put him in foster care with you as a family. We know you're looking to adopt, so it's a potential. And then there's ways that they fast track that. And so the adoptive or foster families told about how bad the parents are. And I had a case where the parents did adopt, and they told me later, after we got the case files and we'd adopted and we got the case files to look over to familiarize ourselves with the case, we found out that it wasn't a situation that could have been fixed with the biological parents. And so there's parents who have their kids adopted out, like a white family adopts their African American or Hispanic kids, and they never see them again. And the white family that's adopting them, the nice family, you know, it's for nice families, they changed their names, cut their hair, everything. It's like to completely delete their past. And so whenever I see white people walking around with brown kids now, I always look and go, yeah, I wonder what adoption that was about, you know? Oh yeah, you can always find fault with families and everything, but I don't see like black people with a bunch of adopted white kids or Mexican families with adopted little blonde girls. I don't see it, but I see the reverse frequently. Now, you'll excuse me that sometimes I do one of these segments and I put them all together for a video. And sometimes the program malfunctions and I lose the whole segment. It ended up not recording anything. And so then this is all pretty spontaneous. I mean, I do keep a few notes, but I completely forget sometimes all the different things that I had in there as they came to mind. And so maybe I repeat myself. You can indulge me a little bit. So once again, this video series is about what DHS Oregon does to families, the trauma they put them through. And I'll see, you know, parents that contact me or I'll hear their stories. And they already came from a rough past. DHS loves to take kids from people who are foster kids. They love to perpetuate that. And the kids tell what a bitter experience they had in foster care, how they were treated. And so some of these parents come and they come with liabilities. They didn't get a good education. They came from broken homes. They're struggling to make do with the skills they have. And it's tragic to watch what DHS does to them, these nice people that work at DHS and these nice foster parents, and how these parents are having to compete for their kids, the most basic right, and we have this evil empire of lies, this DHS that has made it their supreme right to take people's children as if they were on loan from the state. That's how horrible this is. And I've lived in other countries, and in most of the places, it would be unimaginable for the state to come in and take people's children and not just work things out with the family. And it's wild what they see going on in this country, all under the table, because the bulk of Americans are in denial about this. Now I tell the activist groups, I says, you know, you can have all the Zooms and meetups and all this different stuff you want to do and, you know, go on and on. You're preaching to the choir. What you have to do is put in people's eyesight comments, flyers, brochures, stickers, posters, anywhere you can, all the time, that tell the public that's in denial, that doesn't want to know any bad stories, especially if they're making money off bad stories, what's going on. Doesn't do any good to preach to the choir beyond the point of a little bit of support, you know, that kind of thing, that you're helping out families, especially parents that are going through this for the first moment, which is, it's just like being thrown off a building from what they tell me. And I think a lot of the grief, you know, apart from that support, this issue has to be pushed into the eyes of people who consider themselves untouchable, that no one would ever take their kids because they're middle income or upper income, or they have connections, or they're respectable, they don't have purple hair or tattoo on the side of their face or their neck or a ring in their nose or something, and have their kids taken away because of all these prejudices. Child removals disproportionately affect minority, low-income families. We discussed that. One of the things that I wanted to mention was that DHS takes kids, and DHS, and I mentioned this in one of the pieces of video that fell through the floor. DHS takes kids, and DHS is pro-choice. In other words, they're fully supportive of abortion up until birth. And yet they go to church women for foster parents. And then the church woman is this little hero, you know, she's a foster mom, yeah. And the church has a liaison with DHS. And DHS workers might be in the church, and they pick out a family and then go pick a kid, an infant or something, and already have a family picked out that they're going to give the kid to. And it's just like in-house good old boys, good old time, right? Except the churches are pro-life. They claim to be totally opposed to abortion, okay? Now, if you go to places like Salem Kaiser Right to Life in Salem, Oregon, and you walk in as a guy and you ask them, what are you doing related to men in the pro-life issue? They're pretty clueless. They're like, huh? Why would we have an outreach to men about pro-life? I mean, they've never heard that maybe a guy says, hey, you got to get an abortion. Or maybe they've never heard of a guy that says, you know, let's not do an abortion. Let's work out what we can work out. Let's stay together, whatever, you know, like that. And then I said to him, well, you know, there's this center over here on one street that, you know, claims to help expecting mothers and everything. Are you aware of any dealings they've had with DHS? Taking children, babies, so forth. And no. So I said, well, there's these women that have had their 2 little children taken or whatever, and they get pregnant, and I've had them call me and tell me that it was so traumatic to have their children taken that they couldn't imagine going through having another child taken. So they had, or they're going to have, an abortion. And DHS knows this is going on. DHS workers actually tell parents, and I've had them tell a friend of mine, if you get pregnant, we're taking your baby. Now, this is the scum of the earth, you fucking people at DHS. This is who you are. You're like little fucking Gestapo motherfuckers. And I'm going to tell you that because you need to be told that. You're the scum of the earth. You would be the people in Auschwitz telling little kids, I'm taking you to the showers so you can get a good night's rest, and you put them in gas chambers. That's what you motherfuckers are, okay? Just to get this straight, where we're coming from and how evil you caseworkers and people, lying people at DHS are. All the way to the top. No criminal charges. Nobody gets fired. Hey, you're evil. What about the case of Mark Walsh in Polk County, Oregon, who was having an affair, it's accused, with a woman named Kate Woodrum. And he pulls this little Romanian kid into a hotel room, so he has an excuse to call this woman to the hotel room, the story goes. And the kid woke up, and he's banging this woman in the bed next to him. And so they threaten this kid, and they shove him off to Utah. And this is the scum that's DHS. He eventually resigned, but no criminal charges. And he's out grabbing, he worked for CPS, and he's out grabbing people's kids. But this is what he's doing and how he's covering his tracks. I mean, these people are scum. So I was talking to Salem Kaiser Right to Life, and they were clueless about this whole aspect of abortion and some willingness to have men involved in the issue. They look like, get out of my office. And then I went over to this pregnancy center, and I talked to them about the issue, and they were clueless as well. And then they go, well, we did have a case where a woman was standing here in the lobby with her baby, and DHS came in and took the baby right away with her and took the baby right away from her and walked out the door. But it was clueless of this whole issue of what they were doing to families and how they were ignorant and standing around while all these issues related to abortion were going on that they weren't even aware of or addressing. So that's about all I'm going to try to load into this video. You can visit the website dhsoregon.com. There's a contact, means of contacting me there. And we'll go over different subjects. And if someone requests that I cover a certain subject, I will. But once again, I'd like to mention that DHS has a cookie cutter set of tactics that they use against parents. And a lot of these are discussed in the DHS handbook on that website that you can download. I also mail them out, paper copies to people. And the handbook is there for the purpose of preparing you for what they are willing to do to you and the tactics that courts, judges, lawyers, and all these contractors are willing to use in keeping you from getting your children back.